Tim, I was thinking after we concluded our planning for the show flow for this week, that I needed to do some research on the wasted time of that people spend in meetings, especially project managers. And no sooner did you hang up from our planning session that I got on LinkedIn, and Gary Vaynerchuk had a big meme on LinkedIn. But I want to read what he said, and then some of the research that I did. Gary said, meetings are so fascinating. Almost every one of them is way too long. For what is needed. I love 7-minute meetings that are normally booked for 30 minutes. I love 27-minute meetings that are normally booked for an hour. People are always complaining that they don't have enough time, when in fact they just had 9 meetings that day and all were wasted by filling the time they scheduled and thus wasting 2 to 4 hours. I thought that was, talk about prescient. Right after you and I spoke.
Yeah.
And Gary brought this up, but here's some of the research I did. On average, professionals have 61 meetings every single month, during the workdays. That's on average. That's what, 3 or 4 a day, right?
Yes, about right.
Project managers spend fully 1/2 of their time in project-related meetings. I found that kind of shocking, but then I thought back to my time as a project manager. Maybe it's not so far off. But here's the part that I really kind of want to weave into our discussion today. That 55% of meetings, this is based on a poll taken in 2004, over half of meetings are dominated by 1 or 2 people. So no matter how many people you have in the meeting, they're dominated by 1 or 2. A third of the participants feel that they could be fired for speaking the truth in a meeting. I think that's a little scary. Almost 40% of decisions are made after the meeting is over. So then why did we have the meeting, right? And 80% of the discussion in the meeting is about topics that people already agree upon. Those are horrible statistics. Anyway, so let's get into this. Let's get into this discussion.
So that's really important. Why do we have meetings at all? If they're such a waste of time, if they're there and we've already done what the meeting's supposed to do, why do we even have them?
Well, is the question, why do we even have them? Or is the question more, yes, we need them, but we're wasting them. We're wasting the opportunity that they give us to come together. What are your thoughts on why we need meetings? What is it? Why do we get together to collaborate in meetings?
Oh boy. So I'm not going to open my Drucker. Let's just see if you and I can list them.
Sure.
Share information, and that means knowledge management and information management, mentoring, coaching, deliver updates, put together information for communications, make decisions, problem solve. That's about all, really. Can you think of any others?
No, I think you could. Well, I suppose there are some social type meetings that are just for the sake of social, but that's not really what we're talking about here in dealing with business meetings. But I noticed that a couple of those, for example, to share information. And I was thinking, if 80%, one of those statistics was that 80% of the discussion in meetings is about topics people already agree upon. If all we're doing is sharing information, could we not have done that in an email?
That's the important thing. If the meeting is only for consensus, okay, from a personal experience standpoint, there are times when I knew I was only going to be able to hold people accountable, hold their feet to the fire when they were face to face with me, even virtually over a video conference. Only when I knew I could stare them in the eye and I felt them staring me in the eye could I hold them accountable and do it in a public forum. It's harsh and it's a little strong, but sometimes consensus is consensus, and you need to use the leverage of the team or the group in order to make sure that the person who is outside of consensus understands the statement they're making. And you can only do that in a group session. So there are meetings where that is a valid component. But again, there is an action that's required. Meetings are a specific medium to apply control. And again, you apply the amount of control necessary to get the response that you need, no more, no less. If you applied that, then your meetings will be appropriate.
No, and I agree with that. And I'll tell you what, so something, let's say, as mundane as a status meeting, typically that's accompanied with a status report that's contractually required, whether you're an internal organization or an external vendor. You have a contractual status report. It's probably due weekly, and it's there every week, same format, same format, same format. So then why do we need a meeting to regurgitate the status report? And here's why I believe that this is important face-to-face, or as you were saying, virtually, is, and I've been guilty of this as a project manager as well. He who has the pen basically sets the tone and sets the rules. So if I'm writing a status report, then I can slant that report to favor my progress on the project, and perhaps in favoring me, therefore disfavor my client, as an example. And I've actually been in these situations on behalf of the client where I've noted that the project status report came out very slanted towards the vendor himself or itself. And so in a project status meeting, we were able to explore that sentiment and get a much more even-keeled understanding of what the project status report really meant. And in some cases, actually had the vendor change the language in the status report to make sure that it was more even-keeled. So I can see that that's a great way of having an in-person meeting, or why a meeting might be necessary.
There's another reason. And a lot of managers and leaders like meetings because there's a certain part of our population who solves problems outside of our heads, extroverts. They need to bounce ideas off of each other. It's not that they're lecturing or they're going on or rambling. It's that they're trying to put two to two together. I'm not that way. I work very happily in my fortress of solitude here. And I come out and I say, here's the idea I have. But I've noted that a lot of my peers and a lot of my management supervisors use meetings because that is the vehicle with which they have learned to solve problems. Now, if this meeting is stated to solve that problem, I'm okay with that, as long as we understand that as soon as solving that problem is met, the meeting's over. But the problem is that really what the stated objective is? Like you said, it's a status meeting. No, it's not. We're solving a problem. We go in with an agenda, and actually that's not the objective of the meeting. This is one thing where we can really excel if we build our, self-awareness and emotional intelligence and understand how people behave, act, and manage. I've seen this over and over again, and I see this in a lot of my classes. Some of my students, they'll sit there, and then they'll tell me the answer. And some of my students just ramble and ramble and ramble. It's not that they're rambling. It's they're trying to put two and two together. And the only way they can do it is throw all the pieces out on the desk and then see how they fit together.
Yeah, I can see that. In fact, whenever I would run a status meeting, a mundane weekly status meeting, part of the agenda was often on things that needed to be handled that I myself as project manager or my team could not solve on behalf of the client. So we had a section in the status report that dealt with current events or current issues that we needed to collectively solve. I could make a decision on behalf of the client, but I don't know that that's the way the client would want to go. And so we had to have that discussion.
Yep. And the meeting there is the milestone with which you make the decision, so you know the proper action to make. Very
Yeah,
good. Very
exactly.
good.
So based on this, based on this kind of discussion, and we know some of the problems, and those statistics, by the way, that I read off earlier were, I think, a black eye in the minds of business who are running projects. But based on that, what skills do you feel are best for facilitating or for managing meetings?
Oh boy. Okay, so I talked about emotional intelligence and self-awareness. I have to be able to tell when I'm running on and I'm off agenda. Number two, active listening. The ability to not just hear, but listen. And that includes acknowledgement, right? Repeating what people said, validating, um, understanding not just the information given, but the context. And then on top of that, the whole concept of meeting management itself. How do I run effective meetings? And this is not something that people are born to. It's something that you learn. Now, the other thing is the mechanics of helping others get through effective meetings. We call that facilitation, right? Stepping out of the decision and ensuring that people are following the process. And this is something that a project manager is called to do often. Number one, it makes sure the processes are followed. Number two, it makes sure that the project manager is not perceived as someone who's, manipulating the facts or trying to influence the outcome. I've never seen my value as a project manager as influencing outcomes. It doesn't work best that way. I've been a good project manager, and I've been in the flow of good project management when I've sat back and I've actually basically delegated and helped others to actually come to a better solution than I could have come up with.
No, that is certainly true. I will say, though, I've been guilty of the other one where I've tried to influence the, the outcome. And mainly, and I'll tell you, and maybe it's the types of clients that I've worked with in the past, clients that tend to verbalize and like to discuss and kind of go on for a while. Whereas I've been trained, and I'm sure you have as well, that time is of the essence, that we need to get through this. We need to make progress. We need to show weekly progress. And so you want to get to that decision quicker. And so there's ways to, and I'll use a word that I don't like, but I'll use it anyway. There's ways to manipulate the process so that we can come to a outcome, and hopefully a desired outcome. But like you, I think I've also, in trying to push for that desired outcome, I've also learned to work with that client to understand more of their perspective so the outcome ends up being better. But it is a faster reached outcome that otherwise would take up an hour and a half in an hour meeting.
Yeah. And with clients, you may never see them again. Now, yeah, with fellow employees and workers, you may have a reason, and a very good reason, to extend that meeting so that, number one, you have an opportunity to do it correctly. Number two, you have an opportunity to do some coaching so that you ensure that they know a better way to do things. And I've done that as well. So you used a word that I liked. Well, I don't like it, but I really appreciate that you used it. Persuasion, not persuasion, manipulation. And yes, I've done that too. I'm very good. I'm very good at manipulation. It's not because I've studied manipulation. It's because I've studied persuasion. Persuasion is a way to get into a debate and, using certain tricks and certain skills and the understanding of human behavior, be able to help them see things in a different way. Now, the way I finally figured this out, and I figured it out after about 12 years of teaching, that in order for me to not go into that and manipulation was to actually, instead of lead them through the decision, open the door and let them walk through and make them the responsible ones to take the action. And that's what I see as facilitation. It's the door opener, not the person who walks through the door.
So maybe a better word for manipulation actually is persuasion, but possibly influence. Because I think as a project manager, we have a certain amount of cachet in the project. Now we have to be careful because I know in the projects that I led, not only was I the project manager, but I also had deep subject matter knowledge. And so it could have been pretty easy to manipulate or to influence to make sure that people arrived at my conclusion. But that wasn't the nature of the way I wanted to run the project. The way I wanted to run it was that, I think you said it best, not take them through the door, but open the door. And maybe the idea is to take them to the door, open it for them so that they make the ultimate decision and feel pleased about making that decision that you've helped facilitate.
Exactly. And you know, in a client environment, in a consulting client, you're accountable for that because it's their investment. It's their decision. And how dare you make a decision on behalf of them for their money? You know,
That's true.
They're here and they want something. What they don't have is the ability to figure out how they want it, what they want, and why they want. And that's basically how a good project manager really makes their money and creates their value.
That's true. And even in that, you know, they're the business, as you say, they're the business deciders. We tend to be the technology and process deciders to bring them their system. But even in that technology and process, if we can see ways to help on their business decisions, I have no problem throwing that on the table and letting them come back. Because quite often we have, through that collaboration of IT and business, come up with some incredibly creative and easily usable solutions. So I think all of this comes to, you know, this whole thing that we're talking about is good facilitation skills. And I think that only comes with a lot of experience.
Yeah, it does. And also enough years of making mistakes to where the ego and the whole hubris is effectively emotionally beat out of you. That there was a time where I was broken because I was making the same mistake with going into meetings and going into decisions and working through all of these human behavior issues where the very thing I should be doing was exactly the last thing that I actually chose, which is, no, don't make the decision. You've done this 30 times, but these people come with different skills. How dare you think that your skills are any better than theirs?
So what do you think, as you've gone through your career and managed or facilitated meetings, and we are talking about the whole idea of meeting facilitation, what do you feel are some of the difficulties around managing meetings? What do you feel are some of the group dynamic issues that occur in especially some of these meetings that go on for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours? I mean, think about that. What are some of the issues you've seen or group dynamic issues you've seen in those situations?
So it boils down to two categories, right? The mechanics of the meeting and the behaviors of the humans. The mechanics of the meetings, we have an agenda, and all of a sudden the agenda is thrown aside because there is another direction that's required. There is a human component. You know, the leader speaks up first. Nobody else is going to say anything to make that leader wrong. Yeah. Like you said, the decision and the perceptions are already established. We're stuck. We're going to have two rows of people staring at each other across the table. And the very best thing you can do is basically, I hate to say this, but talk about manipulation. When I've had this, I've used a little trick that really gets the floor rocking. I basically set the dilemma, which is polar opposites, right? Number one, let me take this was a chemical company out in California, and I had a bunch of directors there, like 4 or 5 directors of organizations, and I had the CIO and the CTO in the same room, and then a couple vice presidents, and they were looking at the problem that they had a bunch of network attached storage, right? The storage was down by their feet, plugged into the computers, and they were growing their entire data footprint 3%, 5% per year, which for a 20,000 employee corporation, which was pretty sizable, and they were trying to decide what they were going to do. And I saw that nothing was going to happen. They were stuck and they were silent. And I said, okay, we have polar opposites here. I didn't call the people out. I called the problem out. And I said, okay, this corporation is going to fail. Somewhere along the line, you're going to lose critical information that you're going to need, and the corporation is going to go south. It's going to happen. These devices, if they're used 24 hours a day, cannot function the way you want them to. Number two, it's centralized, it's decentralized, and it's all over the map, and you don't know how to leverage that information. So you're not going to move forward. You're not going to be able to do any wonderful data mining or anything like that. Okay. At the same time, you're ready to do some major investing, but you don't know what to invest in. I don't see how you're going to make this decision. And then all of a sudden, one of the directors literally jumped up onto the table and said, see, and he pointed to one of the vice presidents. He said, I was trying to tell you that 2 years ago, and you won't listen to me, you won't listen to me, you won't listen to me. And that cracked the ice. Sometimes in a meeting, you can do this. But again, this is really, really tough. When you have the emotional connection to the outcome of the decision, what you have is conflict, and you have to resolve the conflict before you can solve the problem. And so again, this is an example of what are we really here for? Are we here to get rid of the conflict, to get rid of this argument between these two guys who don't see eye to eye? Or are we here to really solve a problem? And that day, they were paying me, what, $225 an hour to help expose the real problem in that room and get that guy to jump up on the table. And it was a horrible meeting, but it was incredibly effective.
And sometimes we just have to pull that trigger. I know some of the things that I've learned, well, and I've talked to you about my experience doing a project, working on a project in the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii has a beautiful, beautiful way about doing things, and that's always to save face. No matter what you do, you always try to save face. And so I've tried to employ that even as I've come back and worked projects in the mainland. And it's interesting, you get into a situation where, as you were saying, you get into a meeting where perhaps your client counterpart, very senior person in their organization, makes a statement or arrives at a decision that is just, in your heart of hearts, is not going to work. And so how do you allow that senior person to save face at the same time to plow or to dig down into what the real decision should be? And what I found is there's some phrases that you can use, like, all right, let's explore that a little further. If we were to take this course, or if we were to take this course. So you're not dealing with the person, you're dealing with the idea that he or she has floated and put on the table. And so I think, to me, that whole concept of saving face I've tried to live that ever since that I learned that from the people who, and I know there's project managers out there right now listening to us saying, well, of course, that just makes sense. You always want to protect the person's dignity. Yes, you do. But in this hard charging, aggressive thing we call project management, sometimes we put process over feelings and process ahead of dignity. And that's something that we need to just be aware of as we do the facilitation.
Yeah, and that's where I was coming from earlier, saying, what is this meeting for? Is this meeting to care for the people, or is this meeting to solve the issue? And that's, you have to separate the two, and you're responsible for both of them. Conflict management allows people to move together, and issue resolution allows the project to move forward. And you have to resolve the conflict before you can get to the issue. Now, here's the crux. Here's the crux. And it almost never happens in meetings, okay? The people who are most engaged in the conflict are the ones who are most caring about the outcome. You need them because probably they're the very experts you're relying on to solve the issue. And number two, they have the emotional energy to carry the solution forward. If you could somehow harness that energy, and that's what it was actually the turning point for me in my leadership or my humanistic component of project management. If I could figure out how their care and their concern could be transposed from the conflict and the argument onto the issue, we'd be solving this with not a pen and paper, but we'd be solving this with rockets and going to the moon.
You said something that just spurred my memory. I was working on behalf of a client once in their project management office, and the vendor's project manager and I got into a heated discussion. We had to close the door in his office, and we were literally standing and shouting at each other. And then afterwards, a couple hours later, we decided we'd go for a beer and just enjoy each other's companies because we really liked each other. And we kind of looked at this situation, and it wasn't our first down and out, drag him down, almost fisticuffs. No, it wasn't almost fisticuffs, but it was one of those situations where we were really passionate about what we were saying. And we kind of, over a couple of beers, we discussed this as to how it was that we could be such friends and yet end up being in such animated conversation. And as you just hit it on the head, and he said it and I said it, it's because we were passionate about what we do. And it's not that we want to be right, it's that we want to be right for our client. And I was representing the client one way, he was representing as the client's vendor another way. And these heated discussions actually pulled out some very interesting creative processes. But it is because I think you said energy, we were both energized to do the best for our client. Now, we walked out of that room arm in arm, had a couple beers, didn't even have to shake hands because we do like each other and still do. But it's one of those things. I think sometimes that passion has to come through to solve some of those roadblocks or those things, like barriers that get in our way.
At the very least, it's authentic.
Yeah,
and it's an expression of humanity. This is the mark of a good leader. This is why a lot of people follow leaders, because they're so animated, so they're energized, they have conviction. It's not that they want this decision. It's that this decision has value, and it's not just personal value. And I've gone up in front of executives enough time with proposals to know if you don't have that conviction, you're the wrong person to be making those proposals. So it's a really careful, fine line. This is an incredible skill, and I don't know how to give this to people except to give them opportunities to explore this, which means I have to allow people around me to get animated. I have to allow people to feel their emotions so they can understand that they can control them. it's strange because in our society right now, controlling emotions means shutting them off. And I think emotions, if managed, are an incredible source, not just of energy, but of expression, as well as determination. Yeah, and you can't teach them, and that's the problem. How do we learn to actually, besides being in the middle of these type of situations, how do we learn to actually handle this line of fire inside of meetings?
That's a great question, because just when we learn how to do it with one client, we end up in another situation and that client is different and reacts differently. So I think part of it is maturing with age, and not with age so much as maturing with experience. But I think part of it too, and this is where I had a mentor who would often at the end of a meeting, because he was my mentor, he would take me into his office and he would say, now let's discuss what just happened there. Let me help you understand why I said what I said. Let me understand what I think happened with the client's reaction and why he or she reacted that way. So I think there are teachable moments, even though we can't teach, but I think there's teachable moments that we can take and explore, kind of dissect the experience, and then see if it happens again or in another situation, and explore that and see if the circumstances or the results are similar. And I think through that process, one can learn as one observes and studies. You have to, as a developer coming up, as an analyst, as a team lead, as a project manager, the whole time you need to be studying what's going on around you, observing and taking that within, so that when it's your turn, you have the experience based on the experiences and even some of the mistakes of others that have gone before you.
That actually rings a bell. That really speaks very loudly. Right now, in one of my classes, I have a friend, and we're not sharing that we know each other publicly or anything like that, but they're observing me. And then maybe once or twice a week, we talk over the phone or over Zoom, and they say, Tim, why did you do that? And I say this, and this, because this student said this, because this was happening here. I thought to actually knit these concepts together. And my friend says, wow, you're doing all that? That seems really complicated. Couldn't you have just done this? Now, because they're my friend, I listen to them. Why am I not listening to those other students? They're just as smart as my friend. They have just as much good input. Why could I not get feedback like that from everybody in that meeting room? That is my dilemma right now. If I am that way, then I can actually start accessing a lot more information on my self-awareness and my ability as a leader in order to really improve.
Yeah, and I think some of that, I've just been working with some people who've been mentoring me in my business. And one of the things they always tells me, people like to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And I think if you extrapolate that to your experience, you took advice from someone you know, like, and trust. Yeah. Until your other students develop that relationship with you, you're not quite sure where they're coming from. I think it's pretty natural.
Yeah, it's that Dunbar boundary. It's that us versus them. You're exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right.
So here, I've got a question for you. I'm going to simplify. We've been talking a lot about some of the meeting facilitation basics and where things can go wrong in that. But the basics of all, this is what I've been taught all my life. The basics come down to having an agenda. How is it that I can walk into a meeting with an agenda and still have it go off the tracks? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. It's just like having a plan and having the project go awry. It's not the plan that's important. It's the planning. It's the process. It's the level of detail and investment you make in the process of the verb, not necessarily the noun. And this is what I've found. It's not the agenda that's important. It's the agenda-ing. It's the collection. It's the synthesis. And then it's the pre-communication of the agenda. By the time you're following the agenda in a meeting, it's too late. You've already established, by the way you send out the emails, by the way you actually say, 3 days in advance, guys, this is an important meeting. This is what we're going to be doing. It's the whole thing. You tell them what you're going to say, you say, and then you tell them what you said. But you're doing it like 3 times until they're so tired of you saying it that they have it memorized. And that's when you say, good. By that time, when we go in the meeting, then we're all in consensus. It's project management is just a bunch of sit-ups and push-ups and pull-ups. It's getting the process in place and then doing the minor tweaks when you're on stage, when you're in the meeting itself.
And we are process oriented as project managers. I've also found that with agendas and how it's helped me not to get off track is people know that we're going to discuss the number one issues first, or the number one subject matter first, and kind of drill down, and the least important are on the bottom. And what happens is if my hour is up or my 45 minutes is up and I don't get to some of those things in the bottom, oh well. Because I've discussed the main things. And I remember I actually wrote a blog post on this at one time where I talked about the fact that, for example, we have issues. We maintain our issues, our project issues, and we want to be able to get those. And yet somehow the project issues is always the last item on the agenda, which means we run out of time before we get to project issues. So somehow it's those kinds of things that we have to bring forward and keep people's interest in what it is that we're talking about. And by the way, make it interesting, not drone on and on, but make it interesting so that people are engaged, so that people aren't working on their laptops, answering emails while you're giving the report, or while people aren't having side conversations while you're trying to conduct the meeting. You want to be able to have those agenda items, you want to keep it interesting, and you want to have the ground rules, I think, established early.
Yeah, and that's great. There's another one too that I think about a lot: alternatives.
Yeah.
When somebody says this is a great idea, great. Okay, that's the yes side. What happens if we don't implement it? Or what if there's something better that comes along? One of my favorite mentors back in the 2000s said, Tim, there's always an alternative, and you're not giving me any feedback on that. It's alternative 0. What if we do nothing? You need to tell me, and with as much analysis and as much data, what happens if we don't make the change? And if you don't do that, how am I able to make a good decision? And that stuck with me. Yeah. And so I've always lived with that fact that, in a meeting, if I don't hear the opposite side of the story, I am at a point in my life where I don't care if the people who are providing the information, and if I'm going to be the decision maker and I don't get that other side of the story, I can't make the decision. I might as well just pack up and walk out of the room. That's true. Yeah.
At the same time, I think we as facilitators, and I'm saying we project managers as facilitators, we absolutely need to work on our ability to keep things fresh, to keep things interesting, to keep the discussion going. And some of that is to literally, as you see people start to drift towards their laptops, or as they start to look off out the window, thinking about their weekend, I think it's up to us to be able to ask some open-ended questions in ways that are pertinent to the item we're speaking about, but also to keep the meeting interesting and to keep it moving along. I just think that very strongly.
How do you stop people from opening their laptops in your meetings?
Boy, that's a tough one, because I know, because people think, erroneously, in my opinion, people think they can multitask, and really they can't. So part of what I have learned to do is to make sure that people understand that at any time I can throw a question at them. At any time I will walk up to a whiteboard and write something down that elicits conversation. I'll keep a parking lot on one side and begin to assign items off the parking lot to people who are in the meeting, so that they come back next week with answers, or at least progress towards answers. And that way people are always kept on their toes, always listening for when their name comes up, and the tendency to go looking at their laptop to answer an email is lessened. By the way, I've tried that. I've tried the multitasking, and either I've messed up the email and been embarrassed by it, or I've missed an important part of the meeting that I then have to ask.
Yeah, and studies have seen we don't multitask. We don't. Humans don't have that capability. We don't have parallel paths up here. Right. What we do is we task switch. And we think by having this task switching happening at the microsecond level, we're actually doing a lot of things at the same time. But what we're doing is we're spending more energy and more effort in managing all this data in our heads, instead of being effective in making one decision at a time. And again, you learn this as you get older.
Or at least more experienced, right?
Yeah.
Because right. I've met some older folks that still
yeah, I agree with you.
Can't deal with that. But
now here's an important thing too. How about this one? Having an executive come into a meeting you didn't plan for. This is something that confounded me, because they heard I was on site and they wanted to be part of this initiative, and they wanted to hear what was going on. How do you manage that one?
I just take it in stride, and I welcome them with open arms, because if I can get a primary stakeholder that interested that he'll come to a meeting, man, I am fawning all over that person. I had a situation a while ago where we had won the how do I say this? We had won the opportunity to come and present our proposal to the prospective client orally. And part of that was to be able to regurgitate our written work, which was, boring, in an interesting manner, but also be there to answer questions. And I remember being thrown off, because I knew the people who were part of the, I knew of the people. I knew them I didn't know them personally, but I knew their names, the people who were kind of interviewing us. But there was this one woman in the back who was sitting there working on her laptop, but every once in a while would kind of cock her head and look up. And she kept, and it threw me off, because my focus, although I was answering the panel, my focus kept going to the back of the room to that person, wondering who that was. And so, anticipating that she was someone very important, which I did not know, I was on my absolute best behavior. I did find out later on that she was the primary stakeholder, and was there interested in what we had to say. And after we'd won the business, she became one of my greatest allies. But I think her being in that room in that case helped my cause.
Yeah, it certainly did. And again, it's being able to see the weather and the wind, and know you can't control the wind, but you can control your sails. And you can control the tension of the ropes around the ship and how the sails connect to the ship. And that's about all you can do.
But let me turn that question back around. What if the person who's very senior comes in and his or her main objective for coming in is to create an issue for the project?
Oh, yeah. I've had that many times, whether it was a director level or a VP level or an executive level. It didn't make sense. Finance would sit in on the meetings, and the VP of finance for a business unit would be there harumphing and saying, I don't like the way you're doing things. It doesn't make sense to me. It you don't treat the numbers as we do. And I knew that I could actually sit down with them and I could demonstrate that I was working with 3 of their direct reports. And I probably knew the process almost as well as they did, but there was no winning that battle. And all I could do was say, thank you for that input. It really gives me some more insight. Let me find some time where you and I can sit down and we can actually figure out where the confusion lies.
Well, and that's exactly right. You have to be respectful, whether or not they have that senior position, or not. The fact that they walked in on your meeting with some item of disgruntledness, you still have to handle it in a respectful way. And here's what I found is, if you have developed that long-term relationship with the other people in the room, particularly if maybe your project sponsor is there and this is not one of the primary sponsors, sometimes you can just let it go, and the person who's in the room will deal with it outside the meeting afterwards and take care of it on behalf of, not you, but on behalf of the project.
Yeah, there was one time. Oh dear. This was inside the company I worked for too. It was a career limiting behavior. I had 2 VPs in the room and they had an argument. And I am sometimes prone to overstepping my bounds. And I took them after that meeting to a separate room. Can I talk to you guys? And for 5 minutes, I went on and I said, how dare you? You are an example of the corporation to these people, and you're establishing the next 20 years of your behavior. And if you allow this, I'm not going to get any work done from these people. How can I expect any opportunity for them to listen to me if that is the way you're behaving? I knew I was going to get fired one way or the other, but you know what? I didn't. I was very lucky that day. But at the same time, I knew it wasn't going to be effective. But there are some times when you just have to take a stand, when ethics have to step up. And when you do explode like that, the only thing you can do is do massive cleanup, not try to cover your tracks, but make sure that you know that everybody knows that you said you made a mistake here and you overstepped your bounds. But at the same time, sometimes the message is very warranted.
It is. And you also don't want to be the milk toast on the project, just taking it from everybody. You do want to be assertive in some ways, because if you're the project manager, the spearhead is you and the team that is following you to drive that project home on time and within budget, and according to all of the specifications that the users have given to you that you've agreed upon. That is the number one requirement for a project. And if we can't get there, then why are we project managers?
Exactly. And not only that, nobody's going to follow a milk toast.
Yeah,
you can't get anybody to fall behind you, because if you're a milk toast, they know that whenever next vice president comes in, they're going to swagger, and maybe one of the team members is going to get hurt. And so you do have to make those hard ethical decisions sometimes.
So speaking kind of on the ethical path, but as a project manager, you're part of the meeting. We talked a little bit before about influencing outcomes and that sort of thing. But what do you feel about project manager also being a facilitator? Can that project manager maintain her or his objectivity? Can they allow other people to make decisions without sort of coming down on what that decision looks like? If you're both the manager and the facilitator, what do you think?
I'm hearing 2 questions. So
Okay.
The first one is, can a project manager be a facilitator? And I think they have to sometimes. for the most part. Well, again, we're talking about generalizations here. They have to be outside of the decision, and they have to be the ones who are perceived as protecting the process. That's what the project manager does. They're the quality assurance of the management of the work. And they have to ensure that the right decisions are being made in the right manner at the right time. And so from that perspective, I believe facilitation is required. And also, as we talked before, secondarily to that, I think they need to be seen as a facilitator because of with the power and authority. You can be perceived as swaying the vote. And there's a lot of times that I've actually had to step back because I thought that I was applying too much of my bias. I'm again, I'm not smart in everything, and I have to remind myself that I'm not smart in everything, and I have to rely on the smarts of others. And if I don't rely on the smarts of others, I'm I'm out there alone, and I'm not going to be able to do great work. The other part of that is that you're not going to get the best work. You really aren't. The work comes from the team. It doesn't come from the decision maker. And so if you want to get the team behind the work, you're going to have people step up. And, they're going to give you advice. Hopefully you haven't beaten them down enough so that they can still give you advice. They're going to have to be able to commit and vote to it. And also they have to expect that, that your ideas are valued, that's a strong message that a project manager should be giving. Delegation is not, handing off leadership. Delegation is a controlled process. It's a mentoring opportunity or teachable moment. It means here's some power. I'm giving you an opportunity to try this out. I'll help you. I'll catch you if you make minor mistakes, and we'll work through this. And from taking that as a mentoring or a delegation standpoint, I've been pretty successful in, number one, maintaining team discipline and team cohesiveness, as well as felt like I was actually contributing to the bottom line of the project.
Yeah, excuse me, when I was asked this question, I thought through it, and I was thinking too, I have had one situation where we had an independent facilitator. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, it did not work well because in that person's independence, they didn't know enough about the project or about the process or about the issues we were dealing with to be able to really facilitate effectively. So all they could do was kind of ask or provide generic type commentary that, quite frankly, wasted some time. So what I found was, if I could facilitate and check my ego as the project manager and as the subject matter expert in many ways, and allow everyone to be heard, and also not sit there and say it's my way or the highway, which by the way is not my nature anyway. I found that from that type of facilitation, that it was very apropos for the project manager to also be facilitator.
Right. To be a facilitator does not mean you lack the accountability or the knowledge. What it means is you guide the process in a knowledged manner. And that's the problem. And from what you described, that external facilitator didn't have the context enough to help lead to the best decision. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I mean, all we got from that person was independence, which, if that's what you're striving for. And now I did have one situation where something like that worked well. The one team and another team had deep conflicts. And so a facilitator was brought in to specifically handle the conflict. But in that situation, they didn't need to know so many details. They just had to get people talking and figuring out a way to come to a common ground. So, but that's a very rare situation. When we're talking about facilitating meetings and moving forward in decision-making in meetings to progress the project, it's my feeling that it's the project manager who is neck deep immersed in the details of the project plan, of where every single team is moving, where the client wants to go. And only that person really can facilitate well for the good of the project.
Yeah, yeah. So we've been talking about facilitation. We've been talking about meetings and meeting management and the facts that it's very easy to waste time. We've been talking about a lot of ethics here. It sounds like facilitation and leadership, especially servant leadership, seem to be something that fit well together. Do you see them going hand in hand?
I hadn't thought about that, but I suppose, we've talked about servant leadership in the past as an adjunct to other topics. Maybe we need to, Tim, have a podcast just on servant leadership. But I think you're exactly right. If a project manager facilitates a meeting properly, such that all parties are heard, such that what was it that Gary Vaynerchuk said? Such that a 30-minute meeting can be held in 7 minutes.
Right.
Such that the project is first and foremost the one that benefits. I think that is being a servant to the project, to the team, to help facilitate their progress and to keep them moving, and to not, quite frankly, not waste much of their time in meetings.
Right. I'm reminded of an Aristotle statement. When I'm young, I do the right thing because I want other people to see me. And when I'm growing up, I want to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
And that makes a lot of, yeah.
Yeah. And when I get older, I do the right thing even when it hurts, even when I don't want to do it. And that's how I look at facilitation. These decisions I'm part of these days are exciting and I'm passionate about them. And it just hurts when I know it's my turn to step out of the decision and actually help it become a better decision by helping people with their conflict and their confusion, and actually help guide them through this process. I was just on a meeting that lasted an hour and a half yesterday, but it was for 2.5 hours. And because I stepped out and I didn't want to, it actually did help. It's a frustrating, it often is frustrating, and it's not as much personal benefit, but the results are incredible.
Yeah. So as I was exploring today's topic, getting ready for this podcast, I did come across a quote, and let me wrap up with this quote. I kind of like this. This comes from a book called The Art of Facilitation by Hunter, Bailey, and Taylor. He said that the trio says, facilitation is like dancing. If your mind wanders, you miss the rhythm and trip. And I think there's something to be said that we as project managers, if we learn the dance of facilitation and keep our minds focused on the task at hand, we won't wander, we won't trip, and many more projects will be delivered on time, within budget, and according to the client's objectives. How's that for a wrap up?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So as we wrap up, one last thing, Tim, you're on LinkedIn.
Yes, you can find me. I'm the Tim Jerome, who's a consultant and a business advisor. And you, Merv?
I'm also on LinkedIn, both as Merv Jersak, and also my business page on LinkedIn called People First Project Management. And I also have a website called peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com. We can find us there, comment on our blogs, comment on our posts, and keep posted. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks again, everyone. And thanks, Merv, for the opportunity.
You bet.